Okay, so I just wanted to quickly run through how I would kick off the renders when they're all set up. So I've got my layers here. I've got my skull layer with the right materials on it. So if I preview that, okay, sorry, my computer's just running a bit slow. I've got my preview here. I've got my skull, I've got the light coming off the flames and my red bouncing up from my plane underneath, so that's all fine. Now if I switch to my fire layer, I've got my flames and I've got my mask object here. If you look at attribute editor, the skull, I've got it set as a matte object, so that's all fine. And then finally I've got these occlusion layers, this occlusion and wireframe layer here. Now I'll get to them in a minute. So I would go through one by one and kick these off. Now when these buttons are not checked, then they're not going to be included in the batch render. So I would do it bit by bit. You could probably render these two together, the fire and the skull. So in order to do that, I'll open my RenderMan, Advanced RenderMan controls. And I'll start by just making my frame range correct. So obviously this is not right. I'm going to set it to 0 and 200. And then I would check my outputs. Now you can see I've already got them here, but I'm going to delete these just to show you one more time how to set them up. So you can go to Add Channels and Outputs, go to LPE, and I'm going to grab Beauty and then everything down to Indirect Specular Unoccluded. And I'm going to right click and go Create One Output from Channels. That adds it up here. And I'm going to call it Passes. So now once I make sure I'm happy with my resolution and all of that, I'm going to go to RenderMan, Batch Render. Now, just by way of example, actually, I'll just batch render it. Now you're going to see it's going to run through all of these frames before it starts batch rendering, and it's going to do that twice, one for each pass. So I'm just going to pause while it runs through that. Right, so that's played through and these renders are now batch rendering. You'll see it's got 407 tasks to do. So you can see it's automatically set up this file path, which I'm happy with. So it's doing my skull passes, and if I scroll down, as long as this doesn't freeze on me. Sorry, Photoshop is opening. Scroll down and you can see it's going to do my fire frame second. So that's all fine. Now I'm just going to pause this for now because it's going to chew up all my CPU if I don't. And we're going to go back to Maya. I'm going to leave that batch render in the queue. Back in Maya. Now I'm going to jump up to, I'm going to turn these two layers off, and I'm going to jump up to my occlusion layer. And as I said in the previous video, to set up occlusion is really simple, but the main thing is that I need to change my end frame so that it's only 100, because remember I only want 100 frames of occlusion. And I'll go to my integrator and I'll set it to occlusion. And now I can just kick this one off. So RenderMan, batch render, again, it's going to scroll through. It's going to be a bit faster this time because it's not dealing with the fluids, but I'll just pause it anyway. Okay, and now you'll see I've got my occlusion pass here, and that's just 100 frames, and it's in this folder called occlusion. So I'm going to pause that one as well. And finally, I'm going to kick off my wireframe. Same thing. Turn this one on. I'll go back to my globals. My frame range is still 0 to 100, so that's fine. Go to sampling and choose visualizer, shaded wireframe. And again, I'm going to batch render and let that play through. So now that's kicked off. So now I've got my 3 renders here. I've got my 2 beauty passes, my skull and my flames in one. It's 400 frames. And then I've got my occlusion pass and my wireframe, and these batch renders will tell me where they're rendering to. Now you can see, unfortunately, RenderMan creates a new subfolder each time you kick off a render, so you will have to possibly copy all your finished renders into one place before you jump into Nuke. But when you're done, you should have 4 different renders. You should have your ambient occlusion, you should have your wireframe, you should have your beauty pass, and your fluids. And you can comp your beauty and your fluids together in Nuke, which I've shown in the other video, to create your final render. So that's about it. Let me know, email me if you have any problems. Cheers.